The Galactic Harmony Accord had been, by every measurable standard, the single greatest diplomatic achievement in the history of sentient civilization. 11 species gathered aboard the neutral station Vathara Prime, floating serenely in the amber glow of a binary star system that belonged to nobody, and therefore offended nobody. 11 species shaking appendages, exchanging cultural tokens, signing documents with inks and fluids and bioluminescent stamps. It had taken 47 years of careful negotiation, 3 wars narrowly avoided, 1 accidental war that everyone agreed to never discuss again, and roughly 400,000 cups of something the Dreth called peace tea, which smelled like burning copper and tasted, allegedly, like forgiveness. It was, in a word, beautiful. Ambassador Vos Cathara of the Sulian Collective stood at the observation deck of Vathara Prime and watched the stars with all 6 of her visual receptors, feeling something her species called Thuavala, which loosely translates to the specific satisfaction of a plan coming together after decades of wanting to throw the plan directly into a sun. She had given 31 years of her life to this accord. 31 years of shuttling between species who hated each other for reasons ranging from genuine historical trauma to, in one memorable case, a border dispute over a moon that turned out to be uninhabitable anyway and mostly made of compressed gas and bad decisions. And now, here they were. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 6 hours. The signing of the Accord's final ratification document, witnessed by representatives of every signatory species, broadcast across 40 light-years of communication relays to billions of watching citizens. Vos Cathara had rehearsed her speech 112 times. She knew exactly how long to pause after the 3rd sentence for dramatic effect. She had timed the silence. 6 hours. What could possibly go wrong in 6 hours? Oh, you sweet, naive reader. You have clearly never met humans. Now, to be fair, the humans were invited. That's important to establish, because later, much later, in the investigation reports and the 7 separate diplomatic inquiries and the memoir that Ambassador Vos Cathara would eventually write and title, "I Should Have Retired Before This," there would be extensive debate about what exactly the invitation said, and what it implied, and whether certain species had perhaps been less than fully transparent about the timeline. The humans had been extended an observer's invitation to the signing ceremony. Observer, as in watch, as in sit quietly in the designated section, and perhaps applaud politely at the appropriate moments, and under absolutely no circumstances bring weapons. The Sulian Diplomatic Corps had sent the invitation via standard relay 6 months prior. They had received a confirmation, a very brief confirmation, now that Vos Cathara thought about it. 3 words, actually. "We'll be there," which in retrospect should have been parsed more carefully, because there is a meaningful difference between "we will attend your event" and "we will be there," the second of which implies a certain presence, a certain weight, a certain arrival. The humans were very good at arriving. The first indication that something unusual was happening came from sensor technician Prufel, a young Dreth with 17 eyes and the general disposition of someone who has seen too much already and expects to see more. Prufel was running a routine long-range scan of the surrounding sector at approximately 3 hours before the ceremony, mostly to confirm that no uninvited ships were approaching, which was standard protocol, which had never once flagged anything interesting in 40 years of station operations. Prufel stared at his readout for a long moment. Then he stared at it again. Then he called his supervisor, Chief Navigator Orvan, who was a tall, gray-skinned Cathali, with a calm demeanor professionally and a deep existential anxiety, personally, which he managed through breathing exercises and a hobby that involved arranging small stones in precise geometric patterns. Orvan looked at the readout. He looked at Prufel. He looked at the readout again. "Run the calibration check," Orvan said, in the tone of someone hoping very much that the equipment is broken. The equipment was not broken. What the sensors were detecting, at a distance of approximately 4 light minutes and closing at a speed that was, to put it mildly, aggressive, was a ship, not a diplomatic vessel, not a courier shuttle, not even a mid-range escort craft of the kind that nervous ambassadors sometimes brought along and then tried to pretend they hadn't brought. What Prufel sensors were detecting was, by every metric, a warship, specifically an ISDF, that's the Interstellar Defense Force for those keeping score at home, sovereign-class carrier. The kind of vessel that the humans built when they had decided that merely having a ship was insufficient, and what they really needed was a ship that could, if adequately motivated, threaten a small moon. It was called the INS Resolute, and it was magnificent, and it was absolutely catastrophically wrong. Orvan contacted the station's diplomatic liaison, a Sulian named Drevoth, who had the particular misfortune of being the person whose job it was to handle exactly this kind of situation, and who had, in 30 years of service, never once encountered exactly this kind of situation, because this kind of situation was not supposed to happen. Drevoth received the report. He read it twice. He then sat very still for approximately 45 seconds, which for a Sulian is the equivalent of a full emotional breakdown followed by a recovery. Then he called Vos Cathara. Vos Cathara was in the middle of her 113th rehearsal of her speech when the call came through. She answered it. She listened. She looked at the visual feed that Drevoth was transmitting, which showed the INS Resolute on long-range sensors, growing incrementally larger with every passing second, its profile unmistakable, 4 primary gun arrays, 2 launch bays, point defense clusters running along its dorsal ridge like a spine, made of very serious engineering decisions, and the human flag painted on its hull in a size that suggested the humans wanted to make very sure that everyone could see it. Vos Cathara said nothing for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Get me the human diplomatic channel." Now, the human delegation aboard Vithara Prime was small. That had been part of the arrangement. 3 diplomats, 2 aides, 1 cultural attaché named Brinley Osei, who had spent 20 years studying interspecies relations, and who was, by all accounts, a genuinely lovely person who cared deeply about peace, and was currently experiencing what could only be described as a complete failure of advance communication with his own government. Brinley received Vos Cathara's call. He looked at the feed she transmitted. He looked at the INS Resolute growing on the screen. Something behind his eyes did a very complicated thing. "Ambassador," he said, "I want to be completely transparent with you." "Please," said Vos Cathara. "I had absolutely no idea." There was a pause. "I believe you," Vos Cathara said. And she did, actually, because Brinley's expression was the specific expression of a person who is also, in this moment, furious, and you cannot fake that particular combination of embarrassment and professional betrayal. "Who do I speak to about the ship?" "That," said Brinley, and paused, "would be Admiral Petra Vasquez." The name, Vos Cathara would later admit, meant nothing to her at the time. She had not studied human military hierarchy in any depth. She knew, in an abstract way, that humans had admirals, that admirals commanded large ships, and that large ships in the wrong context were a problem. She did not know, because the diplomatic briefings had chosen to omit what they considered non-essential biographical color, that Admiral Petra Vasquez was 63 years old, had served in the ISDF for 41 years, had fought in 2 conflicts and prevented a third through what the official record described as unconventional tactical communication, and was regarded within the human military as either a genius or a significant ongoing liability depending on who you asked and whether those people liked surprising outcomes. She did not know that Vasquez had requested assignment to the Vithara ceremony personally. She did not know yet why. The communication channel opened. The screen filled with a face, angular, weathered dark eyes that had the quality of someone who had looked at many difficult things and concluded that the most productive response was to look directly back. Vasquez was in her command uniform, sitting in what was very obviously the bridge of the Resolute, and behind her, visible through the viewport, the stars of the binary system burned their amber light. "Ambassador Vos Cathara," Vasquez said. Her voice was steady, not warm, exactly, but not cold. The specific temperature of someone who has decided exactly what they are doing and intends to explain it without apology. "I owe you a conversation." "You owe me," Vos Cathara said, and to her credit her voice barely wavered, considerably more than that. "You are approaching a neutral diplomatic station on the day of the most significant treaty ratification in recorded galactic history, aboard a vessel classified as a first strike carrier, without notification, without authorization, and at a speed that my navigation chief has described to me in writing as intentionally dramatic. I would like, Admiral, an explanation." Vasquez looked at her for a moment. "How much do you know," she said, "about the Veth?" Vos Cathara's 6 visual receptors blinked in a way that, among Sulians, indicates the specific cognitive sensation of a floor suddenly not being where you expected it to be. The Veth are extinct, she said. They died out 300 years ago. This station is named for their homeworld. Yes, Vasquez said. About that. And somewhere, on the far edge of the sensor array, in a region of space that had, until 6 hours ago, registered as empty, something that Prufel would describe in his incident report as 17 contacts, no matching profile in any database, moving at speeds that should not be physically possible, slipped out of whatever they had been hiding in, and the amber light of the binary stars, for just a moment, flickered. Vos Cathara stared at the secondary feed that Prufel was now, with what she could only describe as the hands of someone sincerely hoping they were wrong, transmitting to every screen on the station. 17 contacts, no profile match, moving with the specific, deliberate geometry of ships that knew exactly where they were going. Admiral, she said, very slowly. I know, said Vasquez. How long have you known? Long enough, Vasquez said, to bring the Resolute. Vos Cathara had spent 31 years as a diplomat. In that time, she had learned that silence, properly deployed, was the most powerful tool in any negotiation. It forced the other party to fill the void, to reveal something, to overcommit. She had used silence to end 3 border disputes, 2 resource conflicts, and 1 genuinely baffling argument between the Cathali and the Dreth about who had culturally invented a particular type of fermented grain beverage, which had somehow escalated to the level of requiring her personal intervention. She deployed silence now. Vasquez, to her considerable irritation, did not fill it. The Admiral simply waited, watching the same secondary feed that Vos Cathara was watching, those dark eyes tracking the 17 contacts as they moved through the outer sensor grid, with a patience that suggested she had been watching things like this for longer than this conversation had existed. Finally, because the situation was evolving faster than any silence could manage, Vos Cathara spoke. What are they? We call them the Veth Uru, Vasquez said. It's a human approximation of a designation we pulled from a signal intercept about 9 years ago. Whether that's what they call themselves, we genuinely don't know. What we do know is that they predate every spacefaring civilization currently represented on your station by somewhere between 800 and 1,000 years. They did not go extinct, and they have been watching this region of space for a very long time with a level of patience that, frankly, I find personally offensive. Brinley Osei, who was still on the secondary channel, made a sound that was not quite a word but communicated everything. 9 years, Vos Cathara said. You have known about this for 9 years. We suspected for 9 years, Vasquez said. We confirmed 14 months ago. And before you ask why the human government didn't immediately broadcast this information across the galactic relay network, I want you to think very carefully about what happens to a 47-year diplomatic negotiation when you introduce, mid-process, the information that a previously unknown and technologically superior civilization has been silently observing all parties involved and appears to be waiting for something specific. Vos Cathara thought about it. She thought about 11 species, 47 years, 400,000 cups of terrible tea, and 1 accidental war that everyone agreed to never discuss. She thought about what the Cathali delegation would do. She thought about what the Dreth High Council would do. She thought about Representative Thule of the Vorkai, who had needed 6 months of private assurance just to agree to sit in the same room as the Sulian delegation because of a territorial incident from 2 centuries ago that Thule insisted on describing, every single time, in full detail. You were protecting the Accord, she said. We were protecting the possibility of the Accord, Vasquez said. There's a distinction. If we'd announced this 14 months ago, there would be no ceremony today. There would be emergency sessions, military buildups, 3 species leaving the table and 2 more threatening to, and the Veth Uru would have gotten exactly what, based on everything we've modeled, they seem to want. Which is what, exactly? Vasquez looked at her for a moment, with an expression that Vos Cathara was beginning to recognize as the Admiral's particular version of choosing words carefully. Fragmentation, she said. The models suggest they want us divided. Specifically, they want the Accord to fail. The station's ambient hum seemed, suddenly, very loud. On the tactical display, The 17 contacts had arranged themselves into a formation that Vas Cathara's untrained eye found difficult to interpret, but that was causing Chief Navigator Orvan, on a separate channel, to breathe with the specific rhythm of someone doing emergency stone arrangement in his head. They were not approaching aggressively. They were not powering weapons, as far as Prufel could determine, though Prufel kept adding the qualifier, as far as I can determine, with the frequency of someone who has lost confidence in their own instruments. They were simply present, in a ring, around the station's outer perimeter, watching. They were very good at watching. Then why, Vas Cathara said, did you bring the Resolute? If your concern was protecting the Accord, if you wanted to avoid exactly the kind of alarm that a human warship arriving unannounced would cause. Because 14 months of modeling, Vasquez said, told us they would move on the day of the signing, not before, not after. The ceremony itself is the trigger point. 11 species, unified, signing a document that fundamentally restructures the political architecture of this entire region. That is the moment they've been waiting to interrupt. And when they move, I need to already be here. There was a beat. Also, Vasquez added, with a tone that was not quite humor, but was adjacent to it, I didn't think you'd let me come if I asked. Vas Cathara's 6 visual receptors did something complicated. You are, she said, an extraordinarily frustrating species. We get that a lot, Vasquez agreed. The next 40 minutes were, by any reasonable standard of measurement, the most information-dense 40 minutes in the recent history of galactic diplomacy, which is saying something given that the recent history of galactic diplomacy included a period known informally as the 14-hour misunderstanding, which had involved 3 fleets, a mislabeled cargo manifest, and a species that communicated exclusively through scent and had found the entire situation hilarious. Vasquez transmitted everything, the intercepts, the trajectory models, the 14 months of quiet ISDF intelligence work, conducted without official sanction from the human government, which was a detail she delivered with the calm of someone who has made peace with the professional consequences. Vas Cathara read. She called Drevath. She called the heads of every delegation currently aboard Vathara Prime. She watched their faces as they processed what she told them. Representative Thule of the Vorkai asked, twice, whether this was a Sulian fabrication designed to delay the signing. Vas Cathara assured him, with a patience she was assembling in real time from raw materials, that it was not. Chief Delegate Mora of the Dreth looked at the formation on the tactical display for a long time, and then said something in Dreth that the translator rendered as, I knew today felt wrong, which, given that Mora had said something similar every morning for the past 3 years, was either prophetic or statistically inevitable. Yael Simkov, the human diplomatic lead who had been Brinley's superior for 12 years, and who was, at this particular moment, learning things about her own government's activities with the expression of someone discovering an unexpected room in a house they thought they knew entirely, said nothing at all for approximately 4 minutes before saying, very quietly, Vasquez, you are going to have to answer for this. Absolutely, Vasquez said, over the channel. Right after. Right after what? Yael said, as if in answer, and Vas Cathara would spend considerable time afterward debating whether the timing was coincidence or something more deliberate. The Veth Uru moved, not all 17 of them. 2. Breaking from the ring formation with a smooth, sudden acceleration that Pruval tracked with the focused intensity of someone whose professional purpose has just become extremely real. They came in on a direct intercept course for Vathara Prime, not weapons hot by any reading Pruval could get, but not slowing down either, and at the speed they were moving the distinction between unarmed approach and collision was a matter of intent rather than physics, and intent was exactly the thing nobody could currently verify. Admiral, Vas Cathara said. I see them, Vasquez said. The Resolute was already moving, not toward the 2 incoming contacts but positioning itself. Vas Cathara watched on the tactical feed and realized after a moment what Vasquez was doing. She was placing the carrier between the remaining 15 and the station, not charging, not posturing, blocking, the specific geometry of someone who has decided that the most important thing is to make certain that whatever happens next, it happens with the station at her back rather than her side. They're hailing, Primwell said, and his voice had the particular quality of someone reporting information they did not fully believe. Both contacts, standard electromagnetic band, broad spectrum, cycling through known language protocols. A pause. They're trying every language in the relay database. They know our languages, Drevath said, from somewhere behind Vas Cathara, the voice of a man for whom this information was the final increment of a very long day. Of course they do, Vasquez said. They've been listening for 300 years. What came through when the hail resolved was not, technically, a voice. It was closer to the memory of a voice, structured sound that carried meaning without quite carrying the biological weight of something that had ever needed to breathe. The translator took 11 seconds, which was a long time, and what it produced was not a sentence so much as a concept, rendered in Sulian syntax because that was apparently what the Veth Uru had decided was most appropriate for this moment. And the concept was this: you are not ready. The signing must not occur. We will demonstrate why. Silence on the station. Silence on the Resolute's open channel. Then, over the same channel, in a voice that was entirely human and entirely unimpressed, Vasquez said, "No, just that." One word. The kind of word that lands differently depending on who says it. And Vasquez said it with the specific weight of someone who has had 41 years to practice meaning exactly what they say, and has put all 41 of those years into this single syllable. The two approaching contacts slowed. It was possible Vas Cathara would consider this later, carefully, from multiple angles, that they slowed because of the Resolute's positioning. It was possible they slowed because the response was unexpected. It was possible, and this was the interpretation she kept returning to, that in 9 years of watching humanity, the Veth Uru had modeled many responses to their hail, and that response had not been among them. Vasquez opened a full broadcast station-wide, relay-wide, everything. This is Admiral Petra Vasquez of the INS Resolute, transmitting on all channels, to every delegation aboard Vethara Prime, to every species monitoring this ceremony. What you're seeing is an attempt to stop you from doing something that frightens people who've been alone at the top for a very long time. They're not here to protect you. They're here because 11 species agreeing on anything is the most dangerous thing they've ever encountered. A pause, brief and deliberate. So let's give them something to really worry about. Ambassador Vas Cathara, I believe you have a ceremony. Vas Cathara stood very still for one moment. 31 years. 400,000 cups of terrible tea. 113 rehearsals. She turned to Drevath. Prepare the signing hall. What followed was, and multiple independent historical accounts would later agree on this phrasing, the most watched event in recorded galactic history. 11 ambassadors, walking to the signing hall of Vethara Prime, while a human warship held position between their station and 15 unknown vessels, while 2 more unknown vessels sat at the edge of sensor range and did not quite advance. Vas Cathara had not planned for a military escort as dramatic backdrop to her ceremony. She had planned for amber starlight and careful silence, and the specific satisfaction of a plan completing. She got, instead, something considerably louder and considerably more complicated, and, she would admit only to herself, in the quiet afterward, considerably more honest about what the accord actually meant. Thule of the Vorkai signed first, which nobody had expected. He pressed his bioluminescent stamp into the document with a firmness that spoke to something having been decided, and he looked at Vas Cathara as he did it with an expression that said, in a language older than any translator, that some things are worth signing with warships at the window. All 11 signed. The relay broadcast went out across 40 light-years, and the Veth Uru, all 17 contacts, held their formation for exactly 22 minutes after the final signature was recorded. Then they moved, not toward the station, not toward the Resolute, but outward, on a heading that Prul tracked until they vanished from sensor range entirely, gone back into whatever patience they'd come from. Gone but not finished. Vas Cathara understood that clearly enough. They would recalculate, they would wait, they were very good at waiting. But they had waited 300 years for this specific moment, and this specific moment had already happened. Yael Simkov found Vasquez on the command channel after the contacts cleared, and said, with the tone of someone composing themselves very precisely, "The inquiry is going to be extensive." "I know," Vasquez said. "You acted without authorization, brought a first-strike carrier to a neutral diplomatic station, withheld intelligence from both military command and the diplomatic corps for 14 months. Yael. and in doing so may have committed about 11 different violations of the colonial charter. Yael. A pause. What? Did it work? The silence that followed was long enough to be its own kind of answer. In the observation deck of Vathara Prime, Vos Cathara stood with her 6 visual receptors, looking out at the amber light of the binary stars, which burned exactly as they had burned this morning, indifferent to accords and admirals and ancient civilizations with opinions about galactic readiness. Brinley Osei stood beside her, because he had nowhere better to be, and because of all the humans currently aboard this station, he was the one she found least likely to cause a diplomatic incident in the next 20 minutes. Your admiral, she said, after a while. Yes, Brinley agreed. Is she always like that? Brinley considered this with the genuine seriousness it deserved. More or less, he said. The ISDF has a saying, roughly translated, and I want to be clear this loses something in translation. It goes, don't brief Vasquez unless you want Vasquez to do something about it. Vos Cathara made a sound that in Sulian indicated involuntary amusement. 31 years, she said quietly, watching the stars. I spent 31 years making sure this day happened carefully. And it did happen, Brinley said. She looked at him sidelong, all 6 receptors. Not carefully, she said. Brinley smiled the particular smile of a human who knows they are right about something, and has the decency not to say so out loud. No, he agreed. Not carefully. Outside, the amber light held. The accord was signed, and somewhere in the dark between stars, 17 ships that had watched civilizations rise and fracture for 300 years recalculated their models, and found for the first time that the variables included something they had not fully accounted for. Not a species, not a weapon, just an old admiral in a very large ship who had heard the word ready, and decided in the particular way that humans tend to decide things, that it was not a question anyone else got to answer for them.